So moving on to the next session, this is festivals and cultural tourism. So festivals are so used to dealing with surges in audience over a set period of time. But what do you do when we can't gather in large groups? Oh, sorry. This group of fire alarms, the issues of COVID and working from home. This group of festival leaders will talk about how they connected with audiences and built relationships with their communities and learnings for the future. Moderating this panel is Heather Kelly, our communications director here at Ontario Culture Days. The panelists are Tova Arbus from Fringe North, Mark Monahan from Ottawa Bluesfest, Andre Noel from Toronto Caribbean Festival, and Joanna Vicente from TIFF. All right, I am going to pass it over to you, Heather.
All right, there we go. Hopefully everybody can hear me now. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Megan, for setting us up and introducing our wonderful panel this morning. So this panel, Festivals and Cultural Tourism Conversation, will really continue the conversation that was started in the previous panel on placemaking with a somewhat different focus. Over the next half an hour or so together until 11 a.m., I will help to spark the conversation and ask each panelist to share their perspective. And I really encourage our panelists, I'm looking at you online here, to please jump in and respond to and riff off of each other so that we can really make our next few minutes together as conversational as possible. So we do encourage all of you in the audience to comment and ask questions in the Q&A. There actually is an incredible amount of experience and expertise among you in the audience. And I will monitor as best I can to try to draw points for conversation or panelists, and they will be shared and saved for future follow-up from Ontario Culture Days. Okay, so when we think of festivals, we often think of a major event that brings a large number of people to a specific location, sometimes citywide, but often a specific site. And there's both indoor and outdoor considerations often, and it's usually for a relatively short amount of time, a very impactful focus, often 3 days, 1 week, maybe a couple weeks, aside from, we just heard from Tim at Shaw Festival, which is a summer season. But usually it's a very focused time and a very focused location. So as festivals bring people into towns and cities and sites, you know, they often have massive impact, and they can have really significant impact artistically and culturally, also on the local community hosts, on local employment and the local economy. So in this discussion though, we only have a few minutes, so we're going to try and keep it focused mostly on audiences, local community and traveling visitors. And we'll draw on learnings from the past and our present situation to prepare for the future for festivals and cultural tourism on Ontario. So with that in mind, we'll get started, and I'll start with a very broad question for our panelists and hopefully spark some discussion amongst our panelists, and then we'll get into some more very closer specific questions. So really, let's start with what you've learned that you'll carry forward. What have you learned in recent times or through the current situation that we've been dealing with over the last year that you'll carry forward into how you approach cultural tourism in the future? And I think, you know what, let's start with Tova and then head to Andre and just keep conversation going from there, okay? Tova?
Thanks so much, Heather, and thanks to all of you for the conversation today. So I have to admit that coming into this conversation this morning, I think I'm coming in from a bit of a different perspective, because Fringe North as a festival up here in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario is very new. We are just going into our 5th year, and the first couple years were very, very small. We also, like so many, had to cancel our event last year, and really coming back into it for this season, the question of trying to do something live was not within our capacity as we're doing some big internal shifting. So luckily for us, we were able to borrow and best practices from a number of other festivals and started to explore the possibility of what this could mean for us if we shifted to a virtual Fringe for this year. So that's the decision that we made. And I personally spent an enormous amount of time just plugging into other digital events, seeing how you translate an event that's intended to be this live social engagement. I mean, we're talking about a theater festival. How do you capture that magic for the artists who are delivering content and for the audience participants who are going to come and visit your festival? Is there a way to still do that with digital platforms? So the learning is ongoing, and I'm discovering that when artists need to reframe themselves, they are so successful at delivering their creativity in very specific ways. And despite the fact that we shifted to digital, and I as a longtime theater creator was admittedly quite skeptical about this, the content that we're getting for submissions is wonderful. And I'm so excited to see what this new exploration will be. But in terms of our festival, it was really the first time that any of us had even considered that we would do anything but, you know, people in seats, open the doors to the theater. Here is a live person performing for a live audience. And I'm excited to see what new opportunities for accessibility and inclusivity this will open up for our festival.
Thank you, Tova. Andre, what have you learned related to cultural tourism and the Toronto Caribbean Festival that you'll carry forward into the future?
Yeah, I think we had a similar experience. What we found is that, you know, we've been able to, you know, we were recently producing a digital, we did like a digital festival last year, but this year when we were producing content, a digital presentation, I remember thinking as a marketer, we had some masqueraders, you know, we put together this whole production with music and entertainment, and simply just hearing some of the masqueraders literally, you know, crying from the experience of being able to put on the costume and do the whole makeup thing. And, you know, it occurred to me at that time, like that within that little micro experience, that within itself for that person was the experience of Carnival, even outside of being in a parade or music and stuff like that. So I began to focus really on the more intimate experiences, which you don't get to see a lot of times as doing a big festival, as doing the big marketing campaigns, as doing the big outreach. You kind of lose sight of like the individual experience, which is 365 days of the year for our audience specifically. Like they're either working out for Carnival, planning Carnival, they go to carnivals around the world, you know, and it's really helped us expand our social media platform and how we do social media. It's become more of an intimate approach, and it really helped us also to cater to different events going in next year, even starting as early as January, and figuring out how we can have more one-on-ones. We've created these platforms, these forums for conversations among the masqueraders, and it's really just enhanced how we do things. I also participated in Fringe myself a little bit, Tova, this year, and so I understand what you mean about pivoting to doing something like that. And it was daunting, you know, finally get in, and it's the year where I don't get to do all the cool stuff, but, you know, but learned so much, and it was an exceptional experience that, you know, also mirrors what I'm going through at Carnival. And I think it's just been amazing for that in terms of connecting with our audience, connecting with other organizations as well. You know, having conversations like this, I'm getting to see what other people are doing and how we can partner with each other and how much similarities there are. So I'm just learning more from other festivals, to be honest.
Great, thanks, Andre. Joanna, Andre mentioned, you know, 365 as well as festival, and certainly TIFF deals with both 365 and festival. Would you mind sharing something maybe that you've learned in recent times that you're going to be carrying forward into how you approach attracting audiences and cultural tourism?
Yes, hi everyone. So yes, we had to close the building back in March last year, and we immediately started thinking, how do we continue to engage our audience? So we started this initiative. We partnered with Bell Media and Crave and started TIFF Stay at Home Cinema, where we would show films on a weekly basis and bring talent to have conversations. And then, of course, it was time to prepare for festival. And how do you pivot from, you know, a huge festival platform for new films that are coming out, platform for new filmmakers that attracts 500,000 people a year, that brings three different types of stakeholders. You have the public, then you have press and industry. And that's what makes TIFF so special. Other big festivals in the world that you've heard of, like Cannes or Venice or Telluride, for instance, they're all more industry festivals. And what makes TIFF really special is bringing those stakeholders together, and audiences feeling the buzz and feeling like insiders in that industry world. So it was really a challenge to do that digitally, because we had to both cater to our national audiences in Canada, but also to our international audiences, the industry and press. So we ended up having to create two different platforms, but in both platforms, we really try to bring the things that make festival exciting, and bringing that buzz and bringing that access to behind the scenes and access to talent to the digital platform. And what is amazing about digital is that it really is an incredible tool for inclusivity. All of a sudden you can like break barriers, geographic barriers, for people who cannot attend festivals normally. So we were able to reach audiences across Canada. So that was really exciting. So we really accelerated our digital strategy. And while we want to come back and have that incredible theatrical, in-person shared experience, we really feel that digital is going to be part of our future. So looking at, you know, other festivals are going, film festivals are going back to what they used to be in 2019. I think we're looking at a future that that includes digital, that it's looking at a hybrid festival, a hybrid experience that, of course, will put a lot of attention on the in-person experience, but also will have the digital opportunity for people to participate.
Yeah, thank you. I think so. And Mark, we did just see announcement, I think, not long ago about this year's festivals, and so we'd love to know what what you've been learning, what you've learned, what you've discovered, and moving forward into future of the festival. And
sure. Thanks, Heather, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this. I think that there's several issues I would raise that came up for us. I mean, we typically do, a large scale outdoor event. So pivoting to an online format was challenging. And like Andre said, I think, and Tova, we were skeptical about, what the future might lie or what might hold for this type of format. So first of all, we quickly pivoted to doing something and out of necessity, right? Because we wanted to keep our staff on, we wanted to keep busy, and we quickly looked at what are our options. And the options weren't very plentiful, okay, when all this happened. So we actually pivoted to a drive-in, and we delivered a virtual festival last fall. I think our conclusion is that we are a live music event, and nothing really replaces the excitement that's created by having a live audience. And of course, talking about cultural tourism, having a virtual festival does not promote tourism, because people obviously can tune in and aren't likely to travel, So there's sort of this challenge with the digital strategy and also promoting tourism. And I would argue that we believe that there could be a digital future for our event, but primarily what's happened, in our opinion, is our ability to work has become much more efficient, because with a digital world, in the past, as part of the artistic team, I would travel often to 4 or 6 conventions, festivals, throughout the year. And honestly, like one of the biggest conventions is called Polestar, which is usually out in the West Coast. I mean, I'm participating in Polestar now virtually. And honestly, you still want to make those connections, but the digital world has forced us to make these connections online, and has all made us so much more comfortable working online that we see that the future is creating a lot more efficiencies for how the organization works. And I would suggest, and I know the person from the Shaw Festival was talking about their education programs, this is a key area that we're seeing is being able to deliver education programs online for schools, community groups, and so on, where in the past we would have brought in artists, residence artists from out of town. Those people can deliver those programs now to our community virtually, which first of all saves us a lot of money in travel and other costs, and allows us to actually deliver the program to more audiences. So I would argue that's going to be, I think, a huge impact on our ability to deliver those education programs. And also, I feel that the connection that we've made to other arts organizations and continue to make has been invaluable, because the other thing that happened with this pandemic is it forced us to look at collaboration in different ways. And typically when we book artists, there's always been, a bit of a barrier between the industry, and you've got, the agents, the managers, and the artists on one side, and you've got the buyers on the other. And what happened is, with virtually no work, those barriers started to break down, and a lot of conversations started to happen. And I feel there's a much better understanding now between those different sides, and a willingness to better understand our business and for us to understand theirs. And I think that has led to, what will be a much better product for us to deliver to the customer as we come out of this. Just my thoughts.
I love that you mentioned collaboration, because that's something that was just so important this year. We were talking to all of our competitors. We actually agreed, usually festivals are fighting to have the world premiere of a film. And last year we actually shared the world premiere of Nomadland, Chloe Zhao's film that ended up winning the Oscar. And that was wonderful. And then that collaboration was really amazing also. And I'm sure you saw that in your organizations. As we had to pivot, as we had to innovate, just people coming together from different departments, breaking silos and collaborating was just an incredible thing to see this past year.
Absolutely. I love how what you're framing, both of you, is communication with each other, amongst each other, being at the heart of collaboration and the way we communicate and work differently with each other, but then also with audiences and the public. And also, to your point too, Mark, recognizing what the strength, what the magic of your core offering is, and really recognizing and working to that. I'd love to pick up on what I think each of you had touched on in some way about online and digital engagement, relating to inclusivity and relating to access and expanding engagement. And, each of you had spoken to that to some degree, and how that might relate to connecting with either your local communities or with a wider audience that I'll pick up on what you said too, Mark, that may or may not in the future lead to tourism and visits to certain events and locations in the future. But that inclusivity and access and connection and expanded engagement now that we do have, again, if you could speak to how that, what you've experienced or how that shows up for you locally and beyond your usual audiences, that would be great. Tova, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Do you want to jump in on that?
Sure can. Thanks, Heather. I mean, this is really an area of real heart interest for me. This concept of expanding inclusivity and accessibility. It's a conversation we're having daily as a team, and it was one of the things that really convinced us to decide to pivot to digital this year. Trying to just really reach who our audience was and include different types of artists who don't normally join in a Fringe, especially up here in Sault Ste. Marie and region. We're still kind of training folks, if you will, on how to participate in a Fringe, what Fringe festivals even are, what it means to be a creator and submit content, and what it means to join in as an audience member. A different sort of experience, and we've struggled in the past with how to disseminate that message. So already we've discovered in the pivot to digital that we have more artists and different types of artists submitting content, while there's still a lovely performative aspect and that opportunity for creating a visceral experience for folks that they can participate in, which to me is theater. I think if you had presented some of this content to me before we started talking about it in a digital format, I probably would have said, I don't know if that is theater. And I definitely anticipate folks receiving our content this summer asking that question. I'm actually excited about that they'll sit there and say, gee, is this theater? Is this new theater? What does this mean in terms of artistic creation? I think that will expand folks' engagement with our festival in terms of what they can expect from the Fringe experience. When we started to look at offering digital content, within Sault Ste. Marie, we have pretty strong internet access and can assume most folks have a computer and are able to plug in. But as soon as we start talking to some of our kind of parallel communities, especially moving a little bit farther north from us, even as close as 20 minutes north, folks do not have consistent internet. They're talking about paying a lot for broadband, which is very difficult to access. Some folks are still on dial-up. Many do not have computers at home. So it's made us take the extra step of not just, here's the platform where the content will be streaming, here's the link, have a good time, but trying to expand into thinking about folks who that presents a barrier as well. Looking at things like established community partners who could host a live watch party for us, where folks would come and at carefully socially distanced, and capacities would have the opportunity to view on a screen the content that someone else might view at home. We're also working with partners to have hubs around the city at our local university and college where people can come in and engage via the computer lab, talking about supporting ticket price access and that sort of thing with pay what you can options for folks who are having to think about how they connect rather than just flipping open a laptop and plugging in. So talking about it from that inclusivity and accessibility point, there's just started to be a bit of a myriad of questions. Who can see this? How do they access it? What about folks without internet? What about seniors who aren't technologically savvy? Can they still access what we're delivering here? What does that mean in terms of reaching back to community partners who we really heavily have worked with in the past, who are maybe not doing something digital this year? How do we still include them in what we're trying to create? But so far, the discoveries we've made have by and large really expanded that accessibility and the cash pool, I guess you could say, of who will be included in the festival. We're really just pushing that back every day and discovering new ways to include folks, which is really a very exciting thing for our small festival up here, to have that sort of relevance beyond the immediate supportive community around our festival here. So it's an exciting conversation for sure.
I've seen both Mark and Joanna unmute. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. So I wanted to raise a couple of points, which around accessibility. I think it's important. One is when the pandemic hit, many of us, including ourselves, were not that familiar on how to negotiate digital rights, to performances. And in the past, we had not done a lot of recording or recording things for later broadcast because of the difficulty and the challenges in negotiating those contracts with artists and creators. And I think what happened quickly in this whole pandemic was everyone got into it and started asking questions. And again, through our connections and our sharing of information, it became less daunting. And that was for us as the producers or promoters, but also on the artist side. I think artists also hadn't maybe received good advice in the past and now felt that everyone was getting into the digital world. They needed to raise their game and get better understanding. And what's happened is I think there's more of a willingness for artists to offer digital format. And the question is going forward, when we return to fully live, will there be a place for us to present a digital offering? And really, are we going to be able to present our live show? And obviously that's our priority, but will we be able to present an option for people to watch that online? And what will that look like? And to me, that means as long as it's affordable for us to present, I see that opening up an audience, which may not be large, but may be very important. And that could be people who have accessibility issues. And I think that's what we're hearing when we present digital formats, is those people who cannot access your in-person experience are very appreciative of having it available to them. And I think that's very important, but can we come up with a business model that allows us to do both? And that's really the challenge we face.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We're competing as a platform for films. We're competing with everyone: Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Crave. So really finding what is it that we can lean in that is specific to TIFF, and that is the context, that is the conversation, that is the way that we present films and how we have a conversation about it. So trying to lean into those conversations and bring that to audiences. Then looking at how can we make it more accessible. So looking at donors and sponsors to underwrite free tickets and go after the communities that we're targeting. So let's say we have Next Wave, which is our festival that is curated by youth curators and for youth. Then we make it free for everyone under 25. We've been working on this thematic programming that is linked to the cultural calendar. So we are now celebrating Pride Months. We had Asian Heritage Months, National Indigenous Heritage Months. So then we focus on those communities and how to provide access for those communities. But it's also interesting that, for instance, we have a mental health outreach program. And when we try to do that on the digital platform, we actually, it was challenging because we learned that digital literacy and digital access created barriers for some audience members to participate. So it's just a learning experience that we're still trying to, adapt and figure out what the best strategies.
Yeah, I think we've all been kind of learning on the fly and adapting and doing what we can as situation changes a lot over the last year. Andre, I'd love to ask, because with Toronto Caribbean Carnival, you're so known for drawing international audiences, being part of this international kind of carnival network, and also at the same time for really engaging local community around the city, local cultural communities. There's so many kind of weaves of the communities and people that you're engaging locally, citywide, nationally, and internationally. Has the, how have your community kind of engagement strategies shifted, whether that's related to digital or whether that's related to the stay-at-home orders over the last little while?
In terms of inclusivity and accessibility, because the very theme of our festival is freedom and diversity and come one, come all, literally, all size and shape, you just come and you're free and you dance, and it's just, it's very inclusive. So it's easy to sometimes forget how intimidating it can also be, because I know myself, I'm very much intimidated by festivals and other things. Even like TIFF, I remember being intimidated before going, and where do I go, what do I do, and that kind of thing. So we've really taken to looking at those kind of factors and individual experiences of people, or how they see the optics of the festival, because it just can seem this big crazy thing. And one thing is context. So this year has given us a chance to really redefine the context of the festival. It also coincides with, this is the first year that Canada has recognized Emancipation Day federally across the country. And that is the root of the festival. Ontario has always recognized the weekend as a holiday, but it's never been a federal thing. And so when we go back to the context and we really go back to the different communities, even our community, and remind people that this is the context, these are the values and the things of the festival, I think people connect to it more, and they see, okay, and they feel more included, because I think these are values that everybody in North America and Canada especially believe in. They believe in freedom and diversity. And when they can wrap their heads around, this is what it is, and they can connect to individuals and communities, that can pull them in the festival in a way that's more accessible to them. You know what I mean? I mean, you have those brave adventurers who would just dive in, but most of us aren't like that. They need that first connection, somebody to hold their hand and say, this is what it's about, this is where you go. So I think it's given us an opportunity to look at that again, which we don't always get to do when we're doing the large festival, and you have you can rest on your laurels, the many visitors and international people who get it, and you're kind of preaching to the choir, but you forget that not everybody, some people want to, and now you can see the people who can sit behind a screen and spectate and connect in a way before, and we have to make it accessible to them there and communicate to them at that level and figure out how to pull that person in from where they're coming. And we want to also reach out to other communities outside of Ontario who have never trekked in before. So we have a lot of programming around that as well.
Great. Does anybody want to pick up on? All right. Well, we have 5 minutes left, and I'd love to go around and maybe share a little short case study or success story about something that's worked really well for you that you want to move forward with and that you can share with others.
Sorry, Tova, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. You go ahead, Mark. I'm happy to talk after.
I think one of the things that we found was being a large scale event, we've always been focused on, presenting our performances to large crowds. And when the pandemic hit, we had to rethink that, and we started to really examine what people wanted. And we have an event we call the Festival of Small Halls, which is very successful, and it's relatively small performances in rural communities, so in town halls and so on. And what happened is, when the pandemic hit in last fall, we were still allowed to do shows. And we actually did a series of shows for very small audiences, like 50 people indoors. And what we found is that it really started to make us think about the product and the offering, and saw that people were willing to pay more if you delivered a really special experience. And the other thing we found is that because obviously the border was closed, we featured all Canadian artists. And we too often get wrapped up in this notion, and we've been guilty of this, of bringing in these international headliners, which of course are big draws, but we stop sometimes and we don't always put proper value on the Canadian artists and the value that they can bring to audiences. And what we found is rethinking all of this, we now feel, you know, beyond looking at international stars, which we will do, we really have to pay attention to the Canadian artists, and they can draw. And I think it's important to present them in the right light, in the right situation. And given that, your audiences will really appreciate it and they will go.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment, Mark, that offering these kind of special experiences for folks really puts some focus on supporting Canadian artists, on celebrating local and regional offerings versus, you know, falling into that excitement about artists coming from all other places, content from other places, look at all that we offer. And then, you know, kind of, you know, our local and national artists getting lost a bit in the shuffle. For us, one of the things that we've tried to develop is really focusing on centering Indigenous voices. There are several First Nations communities around Sault Ste. Marie, and I've done a lot of work with other organizations going into northern and remote communities, working with young artists there to try to invite them into the creation conversation in terms of understanding that the work they're doing is relevant and has a place in the broader arts and culture conversation. And when I came into this job with Fringe North, that was something that was really important to me. But we really struggled being such a small festival and in a city that you have to drive to get to, not always easily accessible for folks, especially if you're coming from more northerly areas. How do we create space, hold space for, and center these voices while still acknowledging the barriers that they face? Without a bunch of funding to throw at that and say, well, we can just pay for all of the barriers that are in your way, you know, and pave it through financing. That really was a challenge for us to be able to honor that. And so this year with digital, we are able to do that in a really strong way. And I think that will be something that I'll continue to explore as we move forward, even as we shift back to live. The opportunities, you know, and Mark, you touched this on, and others have spoken of this as well, the opportunities for new collaborations and partnerships expand when you can include a digital component. It means reaching young folks in a different kind of way. They are creating online, whereas they might not necessarily be ready to create something to come and perform live. Reaching folks in isolated and remote areas and providing an inroad for participation, whereas they might not see that in other ways. We are also working on building educational programming as well. And I think this is in tandem with many other organizations from what I'm hearing, but to be able to deliver programming. So it's not just one-way participation where we are asking creators to give us their content, but where we can package and deliver learning opportunities to them as well. So for this first foray, that means workshops and artist talks, but we'll be working on expanding what that programming looks like and finding ways to connect artists and creators with learning opportunities, with discovering funding opportunities, and really understanding what it means to work as an artist or a creator, rather than just feeling like you're doing that for your own self and it's not connected back to anything or given any strong value. So I think that the digital influence there will always be a really strong part of ensuring that those opportunities are in place and successful.
Thank you so much, Tova, for those final words. I've been asked to wrap up, and I feel like we could continue this conversation for another couple of hours at least. I would love to, but thank you so much to Tova Arbus from Fringe North International Theatre Festival, Joanna Vicente from TIFF, Mark Monahan from RBC Ottawa Blues Festival, and Andre Newell from Toronto Caribbean Carnival. We really appreciate your time, and it's really been amazing to have these takeaways thinking about context, collaboration, conversations, and communities of our presenters in our sector, of our artists, of our locals, and of our audiences. Thank you all so very much, and back to Ontario Culture Days Symposium.